Hey, I'm Kevin. I'm single and almost all of my friends are married, but that hasn't stopped me from being in their lives. In this podcast, I will talk with these friends and try to prove that, though friendships between married and single people might seem intimidating at first, it's really not that hard. Trust me, if I can do it, you can do it. I have absolutely no vocational qualifications whatsoever. I might be coming at it with a Christian worldview, but I don't work in ministry and I'm not a counselor. What I do have to offer is experience. Over a third of my life spent being what my friends have dubbed a professional third wheel. When I first started this podcast, I knew I would have to eventually address the subject of divorce. Single people being friends with married people can seem complicated enough, but the blast radius of a divorce is far-reaching. Maybe even more so when someone is in the kind of healthy community I advocate for. I knew that this wouldn't be best addressed in the traditional three-person conversation style of the rest of the show. There are so many kinds of situations that can lead to divorce or persist afterwards, and each one requires its own form of tact and flexibility in response. There are mutually agreed upon divorces, divorces due to an affair or abuse, those where one or both people just give up, etc. Even those descriptions cheapen the nuances. If you are a Christian, many divorces are the result of one person walking away from their faith. I didn't want to speak on this topic for a long time for two reasons. One, I wanted to wait until I'd built trust with my listeners before trying to navigate this minefield, in hopes that you'd be practiced in extending grace to me where I fall short. Because I will. And two, I simply hadn't had that much experience in the area. I'm sad to say that I've gained a great deal of familiarity with the subject in the last couple of years within my own circles. I even lost the whole episode of this podcast to a divorce. So I'm going to tackle this subject in two parts, through the lens of two of my friends' very different stories. My hope is that we will manage to accumulate enough wisdom between these to speak into the majority of situations. I'll start by saying we aren't here to talk about the morality of divorce. Like I said, the situations are just too personal and nuanced. There are cases where it's right and cases where it's wrong, but most cases fall somewhere in the gray. Though I will say, if you're a Christian friend to a Christian couple, there may be situations where the most faithful and loving thing to do is to speak into that relationship while it's still a ways off from separation. And there may be hard conversations to be had if one person is sinning against the other. This is risky. But as C.S. Lewis says, to love at all is to be vulnerable. My aim here is to encourage anyone involved or touched by a divorce in any capacity and make them feel a little less alone. It's a tough situation, but it's the time you need your friends the most. And if you've been a faithful friend up to this point, you're poised to make such a meaningful impact by simply being there during this season. But I also don't want this to sound like me lecturing all you friends of rocky marriages on how much you need to show up. There is a unique weariness to being in that position. Trust me, I know. I've compared it to feeling like a child of divorced parents. You put all this work into building a relationship with both spouses of a marriage, and then it falls apart, and you're left going back and forth between two separate friends, trying your best not to share what each one has said about the other. So I want to comfort and strengthen you as much as I can, too. Your steadfastness is a sacrifice, but it makes such a difference. As a Christian, I believe this is the work that will matter thousands of years from now. So let's get into it.
I was married for a total of 7 years.
This is Elise. We've been friends since 2016.
I met my ex at the end of grad school. We got married, and I thought our relationship was pretty good. He was a very driven person. I am also a very driven person. We were always on the go, and that was so much fun. And things got weird in COVID. He went through some very difficult things, as everyone did. For as much time as we spent planning and doing things, we didn't spend a whole lot of time talking to each other about how we were doing. And so at our 6-year wedding anniversary, we had our little anniversary dinner. We had been going to church. He was leader of our small group. We had been planning on having kids together. And he just told me basically on our anniversary night, I don't believe in God and I don't want kids. I was completely blindsided by that. I was totally devastated. The whole reason that I married him was that if we believe in Christ, we can work on anything else as a secondary issue. And then that was suddenly gone. He had led small group 2 days before. I was totally at a loss. right then was when our small group called like an emergency meeting for the next time that we met and told everybody what was going on. And our friend Brianna has been a rock to me in this. She coordinated with one of our pastors and everyone was there to pray for me. And her mom took care of me and got me to eat things and go to sleep.
Yeah.
And from that point, the importance of friends became so apparent.
If this is your first time listening to this podcast and you don't know what a church small group is, it's an intentional small gathering of people from church in order to study the Bible and support one another in prayer and presence. They are meant to be a source of community in both fun times and hardships. And I just wanted to take the chance to brag on mine here. They really showed up for Elise. And yet none of it would have been possible if she hadn't let us in and relied on us.
My ex agreed to go to counseling. We did a lot of counseling together, which was really great for me. The things that I learned about how someone should treat me and learning like the confidence to say, this is what I need, and to say that respectfully, and then to know what to do when someone's not treating you that way. It was a really hard time to be living with someone who didn't really want to be with me, but put in enough effort to make me believe that he wanted to be with me for several months.
Right.
Because he had been going to counseling and like participating in counseling. And so I thought that was evidence that he was in it, but he wasn't. I didn't understand that divorce was a possibility until like 4 days before he said he wanted a divorce.
I still remember the night Elise came in late to small group and told us her husband had asked for a divorce. Though we had all been praying for the restoration of her ex-husband's faith in their marriage, I hate to admit it, but the first question that had crossed my mind when I originally heard about his walking away from Christ had been, is he going to want to divorce Elise now? Don't hear me wrong, these marriages can absolutely work out. But sadly, the pattern I'd seen on several occasions up to then was that those who rejected Christ usually asked for a divorce within a year or so, and burned many bridges along the way. With her then husband's intentions out in the open, Elise now had to figure out how to conduct herself in a godly way through the divorce process, and that was tricky.
I grew up in the Church of Christ and had no positive role models for divorce. It's just like you don't get divorced. And if you do get divorced, you don't talk about it. You don't get remarried. And if you do, people talk about you.
We could venture into theological territory here, but that's not what I'm here to do, nor am I qualified. I'm still very much learning myself on the subject. But with Elise's story, it doesn't matter anyway. She had no say in this. It was very much something that happened to her, that she tried everything in her power to resolve in a godly way. That being said, she, like many in her situation, found her relationship to Scripture muddied in these circumstances. Passages get thrown around out of context, and some people in unhealthy marriages can misunderstand what they're supposed to tolerate in bad situations.
There are ways that Scripture was sort of weaponized against women, and it affected a lot in my marriage and in my trying to keep the marriage together. Like when my ex told me he wanted a divorce, I felt feelings of failure that my marriage had failed, that it was my fault, that the wife is supposed to win her husband back to Christ, which was, he was never going to stay, knowing what I know now. After he left, I had another very wise friend who said, you need to find out where the money is. And when I went looking for the money, I found out that my ex had been cheating on me for the entire length of our marriage. Our pastor quotes Tim Keller all the time. And like one of the things is when they came to him and would say like, oh, I just don't know that I believe this. And he goes, who are you sleeping with? And it's like, oh,
it's
shoot.
so true.
It was true for my story. And you know what? I have had time to sit in these verses, and now I don't find them condemning. Now where I sit, the verse is, but if the unbeliever leaves, you are called to peace. And I absolutely have peace in it now. And I believe that God used divorce to set me free. I was never going to leave that marriage. I was going to stick in it no matter what happened until my ex left me and I found out what I had been set free from.
I wanted to hear specifically what life looked like in the days between her husband's stated intention of wanting a divorce and their actual official divorce date. This can be an especially messy time.
So my ex found someplace else to live. Our counselor recommended a 1-week meetup. Think about it. Make sure you're sure. Say what would need to change if you were going to stay. And my ex just said really horrible, manipulative things that he had been holding on to, but not horrible enough to like say, hey, also I've been cheating on you for 7 years. That was the last time I saw him. He was just gone, which was great because I can't imagine having to do all the things that I did with him there.
Yeah.
So I was living in our house with our dog. I was still getting up and going to work, and I was just putting one foot in front of the other. I don't really have very many memories from that time, except that there were some days that were so horrible that I had to call my best friend to get me out of bed. Mm-hmm. I developed problems with sleeping and eating. Those things kind of cycled up and down. Mm-hmm. And some of those things came back after the divorce. So during the divorce and the process, there were definitely emotional things that I was working through that were really hard. But I also had to keep the house going. For as horrible as my experience was, I only had to take care of myself and a dog.
Right.
Some people have to take care of kids and all the things that go with that, with less sleep, more to do in the same 24-hour period.
Right.
And I had to figure out how to get divorced. It's not easy. You have to be very intentional about it. And especially with me, because my ex didn't really seem to care about participating in the legal process. So a lot of things were delayed. A lot of things should have happened quickly and easily, but he and his lawyer just literally did nothing. And due dates came and went, and we had, it was just a lot. Getting divorced, like the legal and financial processes are overwhelming, and divorce just takes forever. And like mine was like 5 months, and I've met other people who like it takes years because mine, I had no shared business, had no really big equity that needed to be split.
Right.
But even then, it took so long, and it took so many people praying for me, checking on me, and doing practical things for me. Yeah. My small group never tired of taking care of me. Or if they did, they rotated so that they got breaks from me, and I never felt like a burden.
We have this thing we do in our small group called Walking in the Light, which is based on a verse in 1 John where, you share, you're honest with each other, and you have fellowship with one another because of that. And so, it's mostly a time of confession of sins or things you've struggled with or needs that you have. And most of that time when you were at group, everybody would be like, Elise gets it first if she wants it. Like, she can talk as long as she wants. We'll all wait,
Yeah, everyone was so patient with me because I was a broken record, because there was always like a fire to be put out. And so I think the reason that I don't have very many memories of the actual divorce is because it was like I was living in crisis. There was always something wrong. There was always something that he was doing that I couldn't stop. There was something that he wasn't doing that I couldn't make him do. Yeah.
Well, your constant refrain of prayer, whether, anything had really changed or not, was pray that we do get the next step of what needs to be done. And then I actually know that this is going to be over someday, because it didn't feel like it would ever be over.
Yeah. It just felt like evil was winning all the time. It didn't. But I was always fearing the imminent loss of more things, and more things kept being taken from me. Yeah. I lost a house, and it was a future home. We had talked about what room would become the nursery. I lost future kids. I lost all my in-laws. Then I lost my dog, which honestly, after everything, that is the worst. I don't mind losing him because I know that he was bad for me. I still cry for my dog. So when you have that hit after hit after hit, and you're just like, I just can't keep standing, the people who kept checking on me and asking and texting me things. Just knowing that somebody else cared when the person who swore to care for you is actively destroying you, that was God with skin on to me.
This is why we're here right now. It's why, despite my trepidation on covering this topic, I'm doing these episodes anyway. I want to be better at being that person. I want us all to be. Being God with skin on. Or to put it another way I hear in Christian lingo, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. This is it. Trauma may have clouded many of Elise's memories from this time in her life, but what she does remember now are the people who were there for her. So, in an endeavor to become these kinds of people, my first question was, how do we even ask a person going through a divorce how things are going? There were some nights that you'd come into small group and you would absolutely tell us everything. And then there were nights that you would come in and somebody would have to ask. So trying to read that can be hard sometimes because you don't always want or need to talk about it. Sometimes you really do just need to get away from it for a while and to think of other things. And so, how would you kind of encourage people to kind of be there for people going through this stuff in a way that is sensitive and accounts for their needs, but also gets them out of their own head, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question that doesn't have a straightforward answer.
Of course not.
But I think just being aware that when you go to talk to a friend who's going through a divorce, being like, I have no idea how bad it is, but I want them to know that I'm here no matter how bad it is. And so checking in on them over time, it's different when you would come week after week and be like, hey, how are you doing? What's the latest? Versus not seeing somebody for 3 months and be like, hey, tell me all the details and catch me up on everything. That second situation is really overwhelming.
I see.
The first situation is, okay, Kevin's been coming and checking in on me almost every week. I have a good feeling he's going to continue to come checking in on me. And if I just can't handle it, it's going to be a lot easier to be like, I just can't deal with it tonight. It's hard to be the person in that situation. You are going to be in that crisis, putting out fires, fight or flight situation. And so you might accidentally lash out at somebody. You might be like, oh my gosh, just give me a break. Everyone is all up in my business. Should someone ever act like that? No, it's not living in Christ-like, but it's just a really hard situation to be in. So when you go to ask that person, if you get a weird response from someone who's typically a very good friend and you see them under pressure like that, and that's the response that you get, don't take it personal. Give them some grace. Maybe, depending on how well you know them, shoot them a text later and be like, hey, you seem kind of off. If you want to talk, I'm here. For me, people who continually checked in were showing me that they actually cared. And that was huge. The other thing is anticipating that that person won't be able to articulate what they actually need because their brain might be mush.
Right.
So asking them, is this a good time to talk? Giving them an out to say no. Or is now a good time to talk or would another time be better?
Yeah.
The way that you ask your questions to allow someone an out is great. Also, where are you asking them this question?
Yeah.
Are you asking them right after church in the middle of a group of people who don't know everything that's going on? Probably not a time for them to bare their soul to you. Are you asking when you're kind of off to the side after small group and everyone's paired off and chatting? Maybe that's a great time to share. I was comfortable sharing in a small group setting, but maybe this person really needs one-on-one. Maybe this person is exhausted because they've just been through work and they're trying to keep everything else together. Maybe being like, do you want to talk? And they just seem really out. Be like, why don't I text you tomorrow and let's set up a time when we can talk. Give them an easy choice or an easy out, but don't let them take the easy out forever. So being like, hey, do you want to talk now or later?
Right.
And also when people ask me specific questions following up about hey, this was a situation last week with this legal process. That's oh my gosh, you cared enough to remember what that legal mumbo jumbo thing was. Wow. Thank you. I feel so seen because you're remembering this thing that really doesn't matter, to anybody else in their daily life, but is tearing me apart.
Yeah.
When we were trying to get records from Wells Fargo, I had to pay my lawyer thousands of dollars to sit on the phone for Wells Fargo to ultimately be like, oh yeah, we did make that mistake. We'll get that information to you really soon. But we got them. And then we could go end the discovery phase and get ready for mediation.
Right.
I was like, okay, thank you, God. Next thing.
Now, I know not everyone listening might be a Christian, but for us, church is, or is supposed to be, our main place of community. And being in a larger gathering, especially one you attended with your ex-spouse and don't want to lose afterwards, can be really hard. And the worship service can be particularly hard. We're gathering to hear about how things are supposed to be in this world, when we are so aware that they aren't. There's also this delusion we all have that everyone else has got it together, and that tends to be more tangible in this kind of environment. You were showing up to church during this time. What was that like for you being in church while you were kind of going through all of this?
It was so hard. The first time that I showed up without my ex, we'd been going together since life together in Nashville, and walking in without him into this big sanctuary and just being like, oh no, I don't know if I'm going to keep it together through the service. But the first one, Brianna texted me. She's like, what service are you going to go to? I'll be there at the early one. We'll sit here. And I found her. I think our church does a really good job of making room for people who are grieving. There were parts of the service that spoke to me at that point when my marriage was falling apart. And throughout that and through the divorce, like, it's just really hard. Our church is made up of a lot of young families. And church was just a reminder of all the things that I was losing.
Yeah. We talk a lot on this podcast, or we have up to this point, about single people having a hard time hanging out with couples because they're not content in their singleness. But I hadn't really thought about how much harder that's got to be being divorced, because not only are you a single person around married people, but you are a single person who knows what it is like to be married. You not only know what you want, you know what you've lost. And that has to hurt a lot more.
It does. I don't have a way to sugarcoat that.
Yeah.
Going to church and knowing what it feels like to go with someone who you believe also is sitting there believing the same things and singing the same praises, and checking your own heart is so hard, but so important. I have more problems now with looking at other people with kids and checking my own heart. I want people to have good marriages. I want the people around me to like raise good kids, but I just can't tolerate being in certain environments as like I could before.
Right.
And I am actively working on this right now in different parts of my life of saying, is this person actually trying to hurt me, or am I hurting and reading into that and kind of making myself a victim? There's like a certain part of you that wants to be like, I've been through so much. Like, don't I deserve something after what I've suffered? That is not the Lord. But the suffering is still there.
As you know, if you listen to this podcast, I have many friends who have made me a part of their family, which has meant so much. My question to Elise at this point was, should we be cautious with doing this with our friends in her position, who might be sensitive as they're grieving the future families they lost? Her answer, and to quote the Apostle Paul, by no means.
I don't think you need to anticipate that if you have a family, if you are married, that sharing anything that you have with a friend who's going through a divorce is going to hurt them. But ask them how they're doing.
Yeah.
Situations that I have problems with are not with the people that I know the best. It's like fringe people
I see.
that I'm not going to sit down and have that kind of a conversation with. And so it allows me to kind of like fill in the one-sided, like in my head conversation. The people who've invited me in, who have shared their families, their kids, their time, their homes with me, I personally don't have any feelings of, why do you have this and I don't?
Yeah.
Whole story about our small group. We've had 4 babies in 4 months. Yeah.
Gosh,
this summer.
It's been insane.
And that was something that was very anxiety provoking to me before it happened. I was just like, I am going to watch everyone else have babies.
Yeah.
But taking time to know the women and the families in our small group makes it a very different experience. But being single at 35 is way different from being single at 26.
I've honored her face-to-face several times, but I'm going to honor Elise here again for sticking around with the small group during all these feelings. We would have understood if she needed a change of scenery. But the family she has gained by sticking around grows with each baby born, who will one day call her Aunt Elise. This is the family Jesus offers, and the only way to get it is to stick around when it's hard. So if this is you, hang in there. If I never have a biological family of my own, I still have a family. I know, we've gotten off the topic of church a bit. Actually, we really haven't, because this is what church is supposed to be, family. But I do want to return to the Sunday morning worship service for a moment. A lot of my experience with people I know who've been going through relational fallout or divorces and stuff, they're very hard to actually get a hold of at church sometimes. Like you'll see them sneak in the back and then you'll see them like leave as soon, like even before the benediction sometimes. And I found several times like I've very much made a beeline for those people just to say hi before they leave or whatever. And there are mornings where I can get them and they'll stick around for a while. And there's mornings where as soon as I turn my back for 2 seconds, they're gone. And I'm curious from your point of view, what you would say to friends who are trying to be there for their divorcee or, you know, just people in a hard place at church, how you would encourage them to interact with that and to feel about that even, because it can be a bit discouraging. You can take it a bit personal sometimes when you shouldn't.
I would say there was a part of me, and even now there still kind of is, of like, I'm going to show up for church. I don't know that I'm going to find anyone to sit with. I'm going to be there because this is a thing that I know I should do, but I don't really enjoy being here so much, so I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to get out because I'm uncomfortable, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know who is going to talk to me. I don't know if anyone's going to talk to me. I don't know if no one's going to talk to me. Maybe that's like the worst outcome that's bouncing around in that person's head, and so they just jet. If you can, catch them. If you can't, send them a text and be like, hey, I was trying to get you, but I guess you had to run. Can we catch up later? Since now I know what it's like to go through that, and trying to take like an intentionality page out of your book, I have my favorite to-do app, and I will set a reminder for the next day to text that person, or I'll text them, maybe not right then. If they jetted, they're already gone. Or if somebody tells me something, like I'm having a job interview and I'm really nervous about it, like I set a reminder to text them that afternoon after the job interview. So following up doesn't necessarily have to happen at church. If they're jetting, there's probably a reason why. However, if you can intercept them and make them feel more comfortable, great. If you intercept them and it's clear that they are so uncomfortable and they're trying to go, like, let them go.
Right.
But maybe follow up about like, hey, is coffee better? Hey, is a walk better? They're still showing up.
Right,
There's
exactly.
something about being at church that they need. You might be the thing.
And your simple presence in the life of someone in these depths can be meaningful in ways you don't expect. In earlier episodes, I've talked about how being a single friend entering the home of new parents can help them see that this new, hard experience that has consumed their lives and isolated them isn't forever. Stories of someone from the outside remind them that there is an outside, and so much more beyond their current exhaustion. The same is even more true for friends entering into a divorcee's world. And even better, you can take them out in ways you can't with new parents, as a way of helping them reacclimate to single life. Single friends can really shine in this season. A lot of my friends, when they would come down here to hang out after their divorce, there were nights where we really needed to talk about stuff. And that's what they needed from me, was just to listen. And there were nights where I could tell they did not want to talk about it at all. And I could use my spiritual gift of watching stupid YouTube videos and laughing and helping them just not think about things for a while.
The Lord has blessed you tremendously in this area,
Kevin. It's a thing. And it's like, it's not, I am prone to escapism, and that's not always healthy, but there are periods of time where it is a very welcome thing, and you can really love somebody
Absolutely.
by just giving them that for an hour or two, you know? There really is no right answer on how to interact with your friends going through a divorce. It depends on the person, the context, the day. It's a form of grief. It's a mourning of a relationship and a future, and maybe even an identity. If you're like me, you might be tempted to tiptoe around them a bit. My initial impulse was, they don't need to hear about your problems. They have too many of their own, essentially. But I don't actually think that's right. And I'd love for you to back this up if it's true. But I would assume that actually it would be a welcome reprieve to hear about someone else's problems during all of that.
Yeah.
And so I think I was less letting you into my life when you were most letting me into your life. And I know there's only so many hours in the day, but I just wonder how you feel about that in terms of, you know, that playing out, because the person who has the most hardship at the most time doesn't necessarily get a monopoly on hardship. You do want to be as sensitive to that person as possible. But yeah, how do you do life in that way with other people?
But I think being aware of that tension shows that your heart is in the right place. Also, it is unkind to let someone wallow unchecked in sadness and despair. If you notice that you're talking with a friend who's going through something really hard, and it's not just a beaten down crying out, but it is a cyclical perseveration on what is wrong and a refusal to acknowledge other people, other situations, and it's always woe is me. And that's the reason that you feel like you can't share your hardship with them, because that's all they can think about. If you're a good enough friend to say, hey, I think you're in a really bad place and I'm worried about how you're processing all this. I feel like you have no hope. Like, I see this change in you and how you think and how you feel and what you believe. Do you notice that in yourself? Part of that is like speaking to their mental health, and part of that is speaking to their spiritual health.
Yeah.
Those people need you if you are a real friend and able to deliver that with kindness.
Yeah. That is something I had not even thought about. And that's why I'm so nervous to even talk about this subject, because that is such a nuanced thing that you just said. Hard. And it is such a specific situation. And I hope it's obvious if it ever happens. But yeah, that's not to say somebody's having a genuinely hard time and they've got the right support and they've got the right attitude, and you just go, you need to get over it. That's not at all what we're saying.
What we're saying.
Right. But yes, that can happen. And the thing I hadn't thought about in writing any of these questions out is watching your friend's spiritual health that's going through this, because not everybody throws their body on the Lord like you did during that time. Again, extreme traumatic things that happen within families are the most responsible for people walking away from their faith. And so this is a time to not just check in on your friend just for their own well-being, but also to make sure that they're staying strong and that they're encouraged. And it's fine if you have days where you're like, I don't think God loves me.
Oh, yeah. If you are walking with a friend through divorce or something very traumatic, they might not be able to volunteer that information, but you may pick up on patterns of behavior of I don't feel like everything is really well with you and I'm concerned about you, and saying those kind of general statements and see if they can open up a little bit more. In a divorce specifically, for people who think of their spouses as their best friends, divorce changes my perspective on that topic a lot. Yeah. You have one person that is the most important relationship in your life.
Right.
And it's gone. Who do you talk to about these things now?
Right.
There's an opening. So you may be able to speak into that. You may be able to just sit with someone in it.
Not everyone is going to be that on the inside, but I think if you are. I think if you've got a friend who's going through something like this and you are that person for them to be that vulnerable with. I think how much you need to challenge somebody or push somebody based on your prior relationship. Or if they just don't have anybody at all but you checking in and being kind, but like, if you don't know how to be the kindest or to love the best, checking in, like, what do you need today? Because it might be different tomorrow. And I'll ask again then.
Great question, actually. What do you need today? Because that also makes that person think. Separating the feelings of overwhelm, like, I'm never going to get out, and being like, what do I need before I go to sleep?
Right.
And breaking it up into more manageable pieces.
We've gotten into this a bit, but yeah, there are going to be times when your quiet presence is not only all you can offer, but the best thing you can offer. But there's also great power in our words and actions to encourage. And I wanted to dedicate a good portion of this episode to practical things friends of divorcees can say or do to really make a difference.
I think planning things with people who are going through a divorce or any kind of hard time is really important. It made me feel so loved when someone would be like, hey, let's get coffee. Like, they thought to invite me to do a one-on-one thing when I might have nothing planned other than to like go home and walk my dog. That is a long time to be alone with your thoughts until you go to work the next day and see humans. Maybe they work from home and they don't even see humans when they work.
Right.
And intentionality about time to speak about the hard times, but also intentionality of being invited for fun things. Don't automatically count them out because you're like, oh, you know what? I think they're just going to be really self-conscious about being a third wheel or a fifth wheel. Invite them and let them decide. Let them know what the guest list is. Let them know what the plan is. They may feel uncomfortable for a while, but they're not going to feel comfortable until they start getting out and doing things that are fun again. Intentionally inviting people to do fun things helps them realize how to get back to being themselves without their spouse in a group setting.
Yeah.
It just helps people who are in a hard time, who might feel really isolated, have something to look forward to.
Exactly. It gives you a point on the calendar that is something you're actually excited about, as opposed to, oh, I have to go to the courthouse on this day and like sign this thing or whatever.
At some point in my life, it was like nothing is happening from now until a mediation date that may get postponed, which is a horrible way to look at your future. Other practical ways that people love me is I have so many keys to people's houses and so many codes.
Doesn't that feel great?
I think one of the things you absolutely should do is say, come over anytime. But it's even better to say, come over anytime. And we're having dinner on Friday and we want you to come then specifically too. I think Sam.
I refer you to my episode with Sam Alberry. This is a huge point of his.
It is hard to misinterpret. I want you to come eat food in my house with me. Yes. I had a list of like 3 friends I knew I could call at any time. And I could just be at their house. That was great. It was even better when I had an invite.
Yeah.
Other things, I have a note on my phone, I still have it, of just uplifting things that people texted me, sharing scriptures, sharing uplifting messages, telling them that you're praying for them, praying with them right there. Absolutely do that. That made me feel so loved. Just knowing that like, oh, wow, it's Wednesday at 11 a.m. and someone is taking the time to text me something that made them think of me and how it would encourage me.
We spoke about this in my episode with Bethany. One of the hardest things about being single is that you're no one's number one priority. And this is how it's supposed to be. So I can imagine how hard it is when you've been someone's top priority for years and then losing that. When the person who used to think of you the most no longer does, it can feel like no one does. So these little reminders that someone is thinking of you, like texts and invitations, can be so encouraging. And having these open channels with close friends can sometimes save you from yourself too.
I was so emotionally dysregulated that I was like gonna send crazy letters to his family telling him what he had done with like no real end goal, just because I felt like it's what I wanted to do. And I had friends who were close enough and calm enough to say, okay, do you think you need to do that tonight? And I needed those people. They were right. In that moment, I could not fathom anything other than doing exactly what I felt like. It wasn't fair. This is what I had to do.
Yeah.
But that was my crisis brain. So if you are one of those close friends, or if you're picking up on these patterns of like, I think they're losing it. They probably are losing it.
Yeah.
Do something, help them.
Yeah.
But be prepared for that person to not necessarily be receptive.
Happy that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is a hard place to be, but it's an important place to be. I needed someone who could be on the phone while I like scream and raved and ranted. I thought about this. This is another thing. Like, God allowed me to live in a house so I didn't have to scream with neighbors in the apartment.
Yeah. We got the cops called on you pretty quick. Yeah.
It's bad. When it was really over and my ex was like, we were really getting divorced, I'm going to my own apartment. I had a friend who called and she came over and we just sat and cried together. Then after that, she said, can I take your wedding photos down and put them in the office in a box for you? Mm-hmm. So I could walk through my house and not see those things staring back at me. Yeah. She came back later and she said, can I pack up his clothes for you? I didn't have to go through his clothes.
Did that land on you like it did me? How amazing is that? And it's something I never would have even thought about, despite how simple it is. These kinds of intentional, considerate things are why I decided to start this whole podcast in the first place. To the friend who thought to do this for Elise, we both know who you are. I say respect.
Divorce is horrifically expensive. I had several people approach me and offer to pay my retainer for my lawyer, which was one of the most tangibly beautiful ways that I felt loved during that time. Because the people who offered, I knew it would be a large expense for them. If you are able to offer some financial assistance, just ask. You may assume that your friends are doing well. You don't know what accounts get frozen in divorce. You don't know who ends up with what. You don't know what's liquid. Just be like, hey, I know that divorce is really expensive. Are you doing okay? Do you need any help right now? Should I check in later?
Yeah. You can do that as a group too. Like if you don't have the financial means to even offer that to somebody, you can ask a group of people if they would be willing to pitch in and make that happen and then offer that to somebody.
That was a huge one. The other one is people get divorced for all kinds of reasons. Some of them might be because someone is not safe in their home. I wasn't sure how safe I was in my home, but I had incredible friends who came over and changed all the locks on the doors for me. You came over and helped me set up my new security system. Yeah,
we had to disable the ring cam or whatever. Yeah.
And made me feel safe in my own home. When my ex actually came onto the property, I had 10 people on my team who were a buffer so that I never had to see him, and facilitated some things where he needed things from the house. And he saw I had all my friends with me. I had so many people say, do you need a place to stay? Come stay with us.
Yeah.
If you're able to offer that, offer it.
Yeah.
You just don't know what happens behind somebody else's closed doors.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was happening in my own house, in my own relationship. Some people may have a lot of shame in what's happening in their relationship to them or by them. So asking, are you safe, is a perfectly good question to ask.
It's not accusatory. It's just checking.
Yeah.
I'd say even if everything is safe, the offer of a place to stay is good, whether they're the ones staying there, because sometimes it is not easy to stay in that empty house at all. Like you just I want to get out of here. This is a traumatic space for me. So even if you are the one with the house, sometimes you don't want to be there while everything's getting sorted out. So that can be useful for that as well. And
absolutely. Yeah. And the last one is offer your friends a place to be at the holidays. I had so many invitations for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that was another way that I was just like, I am so loved. I had a set of friends that I went to Memphis with, and we just had a fantastic time.
Yeah.
It was a couple a few years older than me and my best friend Jackie, and their children were not coming home for Christmas. And me and Jackie went and placed their 2 daughters, and we had our own Thanksgiving. It was great. And then my best friend Jackie came with me to my parents at Christmas. So the holidays can be a lonely time, and it can be a really important time for you to be there for your friends.
I hope that helps you brainstorm ways you can be there for your divorced or divorcing friends. But even assuming everyone's best intentions, we are human. We inevitably stick our foot in our mouths. Again, much like other grief, there are things that just aren't helpful to hear when you're in Elise's situation. And I want to be aware of as many of these pits as possible so I don't fall into them myself.
Don't ever say everything happens for a reason. Ever.
Yeah, if they want to say that, that's their right. But
they can say that about what they're going through. Just acknowledge that it's hard. It's okay to just sit there. If you have a conversation with a friend who's going through a divorce and they share some details with you, assume that that is confidential. Don't share that with anyone. Don't ever assume that any details that they share with you can be shared with anyone else. And if you're not sure, ask them, can I share this with someone else or can I share that with someone specific?
Yeah.
Just that easy. Don't ask someone in the middle of a divorce when they're going to start dating again. Don't do that. That was the very last thing on my mind. And when I didn't have that many people ask me, but when someone did, I just kind of stared at them with my mouth open. And I was like, I literally do not know what to tell this person. It's just not good.
Yeah. Oof. This is not something I've had to deal with yet, but it is something I'm aware of because of single friends I have that date people within our friend group at church. But it can be really awkward when you have two mutual friends who are dating and then they break up and then you're trying to put together an invite list and you're like, should I invite these people? Because they don't want to be in the same room. So I think if you're a mutual friend of a couple that's divorced and, it's a more amicable divorce rather than somebody has made the other person unsafe or something like that. I honestly don't know how you navigate that besides just asking the people it's very hard because it kind of forces you to choose otherwise. Just to be like, hey, I just want to let you know I did invite this person. Well, automatically the person you're saying that to probably isn't going to come.
Yeah, that's likely.
So that's hard.
But it's much kinder to give them a heads up.
And that might even be something that's worth just talking to those people individually about, what do you want me to do in this situation? Because I want you there. And it always feels better to be invited, even if you're being invited knowing that you're not going to come because of something like this. But I think that's one where you just got to talk it out with people if you're unfortunate enough to be in that situation because it's hard.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah. And I think that brings up, if you know both parties in the divorce, just because you know both people, or if you just know one of them, don't assume that you know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
You only know what they tell you and what you observe, but hold that loosely, have grace for both people, and know that things can be really rough under the surface. Everyone is fighting a hard battle.
Let's change gears a bit. We've talked about how to help friends navigate the grief of divorce, but separation is traumatic too, and that can manifest in ways neither the divorcees or their friends expect.
I think we've spent a lot of time talking about how difficult the process of divorce was for me and how my marriage was falling apart previous to that. It kept being difficult after the divorce was finalized.
Right.
Something can cause a fight or flight or freeze instance where your sympathetic nervous system is just let's go. And you either want to get out or you want to fight someone or you just feel so cranked up irrationally. So I get the opposite. I get a freeze, which is actually the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system going at the same time. So your brain is just I'm getting the brakes and the gas at the same time and I don't know what to do. Things like going to a place that you went to with your spouse and just feeling awful because this is the place and a thing that you did together. And now having to reclaim that can be really hard. I had some friends and we kind of talk about it as a joke. It's we're going to go to Pins. I'm I went there with my ex and they're we're going to reclaim it tonight. But knowing when you walk in, you might need to sit down for a minute.
Yeah.
To let those endorphins kind of run their course and get out of your body. You can have totally nonsensical reactions to things that you can't explain. For me, 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I was fine because I had already been without him for a year plus 5 months.
Right.
The 1 year mark of when my spouse left, I thought I had been doing all this great work in counseling. I felt really calm. I felt really in control of my situation. I was like normal. I had my schedule. I felt great. And that week I fell apart. I could not figure out what was going on. Every like littlest thing would make me cry. And then I saw my counselor and he was like, well, how long has it been since he left? I was like, well, like a year, like exactly. He was like, yeah, so milestones can be really traumatic like that.
Yeah.
So think ahead. If you are going through a divorce or if your friend is going through a divorce and they know a big date is coming up, maybe plan something that can be easily canceled. Plan that you're going to be a mess that week and just weird things are going to get to you. I hate Reese's cups now because my ex liked them.
Right.
I'm like, nope, don't need them. That's fine.
Yeah.
Also, in dating again and being physically intimate, even in the realm of like holding hands, hugging, kissing someone, that can be really difficult too. If you've been with the same person for years, the first time I kissed someone, I like went back to my car and I just had like a 3-minute freeze episode and I couldn't move.
Wow.
But I'd been warned about that one.
Okay. Well,
so I
good.
sat there and I was like gripping my steering wheel. It's like, okay, I knew what that was. But if you had not known, it is a lot. So just giving yourself some time and space and knowing that things work out in different ways.
Yeah.
And also for me, when we were trying to figure out if we could work through things in the marriage, I had a lot of new onset anxiety that I'd never had a problem with before. And it manifested in me not eating. It came back after the divorce was finalized, like several months after the divorce was finalized, like not an eating disorder, but disordered eating, nothing I had ever struggled with before. And it was so frustrating because it also kind of compounded with a lot of my like prior education and feelings of frustration and not being able to like logically deal with it myself. But my brain was still healing. So again, there are things that you may have never dreamed of struggling with that pop up during or after or significantly after the trauma of a divorce. That's normal. So finding the resources of other people who are going through things like that. I was in a divorce care support group that was really important to me at that time. Don't be afraid to ask help for something that is new and you can't explain.
Knowing about the trauma responses of divorce is not just helpful for those who might need to hear that what they're going through is normal. It's also helpful for friends like me who are trying to love well by avoiding responses that might make someone feel more self-conscious or other than they already do. Okay, so divorce leaves scars. Real revelation there, Kevin. What might be a bit more surprising to hear are just how many ways this experience made Elise stronger. As a Christian, I believe in passages like Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, that say, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." God did not desire the hurt done to Elise, but his trajectory for her life is for her good, and her pain, even now, is being redeemed to serve that purpose. True wisdom comes from suffering. You know, you've gone through this experience now. What are some things that you think you're better at now or that you grew in?
This is the hardest thing that's ever happened to me. This level of suffering and loss, I had no context for. So being more comfortable in suffering, in my own suffering and with other people. I definitely think that I have more patience for people who are going through hard things. I had a friend who had something very traumatic happen to her. And I tried 3 or 4 times to set up a time to go get coffee with her, and she had to bail every time. And I think the Elise that I was before the divorce would have been like, well, she just doesn't have her stuff together. I'll wait until she's ready to come and see me. And I'm now able to see like, oh, she must be in a really hard place if she's canceled 3 times in a row. She really needs me to keep pressing in.
Yeah.
Which is just a much healthier, more aware place to be.
I hope hearing this helps us all start in this healthy headspace without having to go through these experiences ourselves.
where before a lot of the shared activities that me and my ex would do are very activity centered.
Right.
I am filling my calendar with intentional time with people and growing relationships. And I find that really fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's something that I need. And I think everybody needs someone who's going to invest in them. And so I've got more time and resources to be that person. I think, like, for me personally, I'm just a way more confident person now. The things that scared me at the beginning of the divorce were like, I had never managed my own finances before. I had always been living with my parents or had no money to manage. Then my ex took over, and he was in a situation where he manipulated me a lot. He took a lot of money from me because I trusted him. That gave me a lot of shame initially, but I've been connected with some really fantastic people, and I have an amazing financial planner now. And it feels really good, that boost of confidence. I know exactly what my money is doing, and I know that no one's pulling one over on me. Another part of my marriage that was very hard is the physical intimacy side of our marriage was very unhealthy. I didn't understand how unhealthy it was until everything fell apart. And I have been doing my own work, healing physically and emotionally from that. There are not a lot of great resources out there for women in a more traditional or fundamental sort of Christian vein. There's a lot of very harmful resources out there that kept me in a place of shame during my marriage. And I'm trying my best to help the women in my life have actual healthy and enjoyable sex lives.
Elise actually organized and recorded a women's sexual health seminar in late 2023. I'll link to it in the show notes. What's different about being single this time around? And it's great to talk to you about this because it's still very fresh. You're still like relearning what it's like to be single, and you've noticed the strengths that you have now that you didn't have in marriage, and you're in a really good place to kind of articulate that.
Mm-hmm. Just the shift of not having one relationship that sort of defines you and not running after that, because now the way that I look at marriage is totally different. I really wanted to get married when I was single in my 20s, and I ran past some pretty big red flags on my way to getting married. But now I don't have any sense of urgency to run back and find a relationship that, like, the bad romantic sort of cultural like description of the relationship that completes you. Like, nope, I've done that. It was bad. I want to do it differently, and I'm not afraid of taking my time to do that.
How's dating different? Not just in your 30s, but with the experience of marriage.
Yeah. I'm actually dating someone right now. So if he ends up listening and we're talking about me being single isn't not married,
right? Yes.
But also dating someone.
He's actually proposed and gotten a yes since this was recorded. So I don't think he's too worried if he's listening. Man, podcasts take so long to make.
Coming out of a relationship that's so bad and healing from that has me practicing, what am I looking for? What am I seeing in the other person? What patterns of behavior am I seeing in them? What are the things that we need to have in common? What are the non-negotiables? And I am just much more prepared to date than I was in my 20s. That was just sort of like, who's around? Is it fun? Great. Having fun is important, but dating now is this what I want for the rest of my life? Because I know what it looks like when it falls apart, and setting physical and emotional boundaries that keep me safe. When I was dating my ex, we just spent a lot of time alone, just the two of us. A lot of physical boundaries got crossed. Really easy to do. It was just the two of you. And I also did not have the community that I have now. We also moved from Nashville to Michigan to Nashville again, living in different places. And it was hard to have the same friends consistently involved in how we were dating. And now when I tell people that I'm dating someone, they're like, oh my gosh, we need to meet him right away. That just makes me feel so good because I've seen how I've missed things before. And I want my friends to know who I'm dating. And I want who I'm dating to know my friends.
Right.
They are the people who really know me the best. Also, just seeing how he interacts with him and learning about how somebody interacts with new people.
Well, it's important for him to see how you interact with your own friends too, because I mean, I'm pretty sure Lewis said this, but you know people on different levels. You have your own relationship with them, but then when they're with other people, those people draw out aspects of that person that you don't draw out. So you get to actually know somebody in a more rounded sense when you see them interact with the people they're comfortable around and the people they're not, but also, you know, more so where do you spend your time? Who am I going to get long term? You know, that kind of thing. But like also, how are you treating other people? Because you may treat me fine, but if you're treating your friends like garbage, I probably don't want to be with you. So, you know, it's things like that. So I think that's just a very wise way to do it. I wanted to circle around one last time to the faith aspect of all of this. As we've touched on, marriage and divorce just hit differently for Christians, or even for those with Christian family. But there are also comforts and power that only those who know Christ have, one being the Bible. You always had a verse on your mind when we hung out during that time. What are some of those that have kind of stayed with you as like, oh, these are bangers, you know, these are real good comforts?
So the first thing that I memorized was Ephesians 6, the passage on the armor of God. And there's the actual parts of like the helmet of salvation and the breastplate of righteousness and the shield of faith. But before you get to all that, it says, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. The Lord is the strong one. And the emphasis before listing the parts of the armor of God is stand firm then. And when the day of evil comes, like you just stand. And that's what I felt like a lot of times. I would run around trying to do these things, but I couldn't make any part of the divorce go faster. I couldn't make it hurt any less. And so I felt like I was just standing, waiting on the Lord. And God gives us these things, equips us, but we don't have to be skilled in battle necessarily.
It's true.
And the verse about when the Israelites are coming out, but Pharaoh's army is pursuing them, there's a verse about like, all you have to do is stand, the Lord will fight for you.
The verse is Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 to 14. It says, "And Moses said to the people, 'Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.'"
That was a huge one. I memorized all of Romans 8. And I think the big thing in there for me was likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And I had a lot of groanings/screamings.
Elise has hit a lot of milestones in a very short period of time since her divorce. But the one I say for last is the most baffling to me, and yet the most encouraging. I've heard Matthew chapter 19, verse 26 misused more than almost any other scripture passage, to the point of cliche. It's the verse that says, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." But this is one of the rare instances I feel it really applies. You have come to forgive your ex. I would love to kind of hear what that looked like for you, because it was not an easy thing and it was not an earthly thing to be able to do.
Oh, no. That was all God.
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to have to forgive him. Even when I thought we were working on the marriage together before he left, I was thinking about like, I need to forgive him for what he's done, or I won't ever be able to talk to him. As he left, as I found things out about what he had done, I could feel the bitterness in my heart, and I could feel what it was doing to me. And I knew I had to start working on it immediately.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of research on forgiveness. And I think what's so interesting about forgiveness is no one really agrees on a definition. And for me, honestly, that was great because it meant that I had to do my own digging for what my forgiveness journey was going to look like. So my sort of framework of forgiveness was like a legal forgiveness of debt. Anytime that there is a transgression, a sin, a debt incurred, someone has to pay it, even if nothing happens.
Right.
So if you have a lamp and your friend breaks the lamp, your friend can either pay the debt by getting a new lamp or paying for it, or you pay the debt by getting a new lamp, or you pay the debt by not having a lamp and not having light. Somebody pays for it every time. And as a believer, I know that my sins that I cannot pay for were paid for by Christ when I was still dead in my sins. For me, it had to start there. And it was really hard to do the work to reconcile that with a God who is just. Because what my ex did was wrong. What he did cheating on me, that was wrong. What he did staying in a relationship and manipulating me to believe that I was in a real relationship that was truthful for 7 years was wrong. There is no one who can repay me 7, 8 years of my life. My ex can never repay that debt. And if I am going to be angry and bitter over this debt that he can never repay, then I'm the one paying the price. So forgiveness is saying, yes, I will pay this price and say that your debt in using up my time and taking a real relationship from me and stealing a future from me, it is forgiven. I'm not going to hold that above your head. You're never going to pay it back. He was never going to pay it back anyway.
Right.
He can't.
Right.
And knowing that his sin in that is between him and God. But God is a God who is just and merciful, that he is going to wipe away every tear in the new heaven and the new earth. And I believe both of those things. Some days I put more emphasis on one than the other. And there are still days when I'm still angry. And that was another thing is there can be righteous anger. What he did was wrong. I can be angry.
Yeah.
But it gets easier. I will say that for anyone who's out there and who is working on forgiving, it gets easier. And I also want to say for anyone working on this forgiveness journey, like I have a pretty clear cut, open and closed case in how my ex treated me, and he got out of town. I will probably never see him again. It's a very different story when you have to see them, you live in the same town as them, you're co-parenting with them. And so my heart goes out to you. You will need more resources than I did, but Christ commands his followers to forgive. And forgiveness for me was something that I prayed that God would allow me to do. And he gave that to me. I was able to forgive my ex maybe like 2 months after the divorce was final. It was a lot of just sitting and thinking and feeling and praying. It is a decision.
Just like love, actually.
Yeah. And so there were still things. I went in to see my counselor and I was like, I forgave my ex. I did it. Hooray. And then like the next day I found out something else horrible that he had done. And I was like, I do not forgive him. And I was like, but I do. I'm just still angry. Like, and sitting in all those things, like that's what the work of forgiveness was for me.
Yeah.
Not easy, not straightforward, not one and done.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you're struggling to maintain forgiveness, congratulations. Good job. You're probably doing it just fine.
Like I said at the beginning, this is just one person's experience of divorce, but there are commonalities with every divorced person I've spoken with. If you or someone you know has gone through this or is actively going through this, I hope this was helpful to hear. Next time, we'll add another data point in our 2-part mini-series on divorce, as I talk with my friend and pastor, Barnabas Piper. Bear with me until then. These kinds of episodes take much longer to make, but I think this subject merits the effort. If you agree, and since you'll have some time, would you mind leaving a review for the show wherever you listen? It really helps me out. I want to get this out to as many people as possible, and that's how you do it. This episode was lovingly edited and produced by me, Kevin Morris. Logo by Cal Patterson. Music by the Universal Donor. Special thanks on this one to Barnabas Piper. As I always say, this podcast is made by humans. We get things wrong. We have blind spots. So I want to hear from you. The show's email is professionalthirdwheelpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call and leave us a voice message at 615-953-0360. Until next time.